His fist came toward her face in front of the whole formation. A wild, angry swing that did not belong in a training circle. And in the half-second before it reached her, Lieutenant Mara Keller saw the shock on the faces of 280 Navy recruits standing in a wide ring around them, the dust of the training field curling around their boots as if even the ground was holding its breath. And somewhere behind the crowd she heard the sharp bark of an instructor's voice shouting, "Jennings, stand down." But it was too late. His anger had already turned into motion, and anger is slow compared to discipline. So her body moved first, not from rage, not from pride, but from the cold habit of years spent learning how to survive when bigger, stronger men decided she should not be there. She stepped in instead of back, her left foot cutting diagonally across the date, her right hand brushing his punch just enough offline that his momentum carried him forward, his elbow hanging in empty space for a heartbeat. And then, with a twist of her hips and a snap of both hands, she trapped his wrist, rolled his shoulder, and dropped her weight. The sound that followed as sharp and clean as a snapped broom handle, a crack that cut through the hot air and left the whole field silent. His scream hitting a second later as his body crashed onto the mat at her feet, and 280 pairs of eyes stared, some wide with fear, some with awe, some with that strange mix of shame and excitement that comes when people see a rule broken and justice served at the same time. For a second, Mara just looked down at him, breathing hard from the speed of the move, not from effort, watching the way his face went white and then red as his brain caught up with what had happened. Ensign Ryland Pierce, star of his academy class, college wrestling champion, the one who joked loudest about quota hires and diversity projects, lay on the ground clutching his ruined arm. And the part of her that had been a scared 19-year-old in a dusty foreign alley years ago, cornered by men who thought a girl in uniform was fair game, wanted to shout right then, wanted to ask him if he still thought the women here were weaker, softer, less deserving to wear the same uniform. But the officer she had worked so hard to become swallowed that impulse, forcing her voice steady as she called out for the medic, even as 3 instructors pushed through the ring, one kneeling by Ryland, another crouching beside her, the third already yelling at the recruits to back up, make space, keep their mouths shut. The training field buzzed with whispers anyway, because this was day 3 of Combat Skills Week at Naval Amphibious Base Edgewater, and the story of what had just happened would race through every barracks and squad bay before evening chow. Mara's commanding officer, Commander Reeves, strode across the field with his jaw set, his eyes like stone, and she felt sweat run down her back despite the morning breeze that came off the water. She knew this moment was bigger than one broken bone, because for weeks now the pressure had been building around her, the quiet doubts, the open mockery, the subtle acts of sabotage that came whenever she tried to push the new integrated training harder. And Ryland Pierce, with his easy grin and his carefully hidden temper, had turned into the sharp edge of that resistance. The one recruit who thought he was speaking for all the others when he laughed loudest at her commands, when he muttered yes, in a way that meant anything but respect, when he bumped into her shoulder in the hallway as if it were an accident and then smiled without saying sorry. She had reported nothing, wanting to win this fight by standards and results, not by complaints. But now his howl on the mat and the crooked angle of his forearm said the conflict had spilled out for everyone to see. Lieutenant Keller, with me, Commander Reeves said, his voice flat, controlled, and she nodded once, stepping away from the ring as Corman eased Ryland onto a stretcher, his curses slurring as the pain meds took hold. A few recruits closest to the action stared at her with a strange respect, others with anger, others with something she recognized as fear that their own hidden ugliness might meet a similar end one day. And as she followed Reeves toward the edge of the field, past the rows of watching faces, she felt again the old weight on her shoulders, the weight that had started a long time before she ever put on a Navy uniform. She had grown up in a small Ohio town where the same 3 streets held everything: school, church, grocery store, and where people said they were proud of freedom but still whispered if a girl had bruises on her arms or if a woman left her husband. Her father had been a mechanic with gentle hands and a back that never stopped hurting, and her mother had worked nights at the diner. But inside their house there had also been her older brother, Lucas, strong and restless, who learned early that being a man meant never backing down, never losing, never crying. and sometimes he practiced that belief on her, shoving her down in snowball fights that turned mean, twisting her arm when she grabbed the remote, pinning her shoulders to the carpet for fun, until she learned that if she stopped struggling completely, his smile would fade and he would let go because there was no sport in beating something that did not fight back. She learned how to read anger on a face in a heartbeat, how to move out of range before a hand landed, how to stand still in a way that made people forget she was in the room. But she also learned something else, something that would shape everything that came later. She learned that she hated fear, that it tasted like metal in her mouth and soaked into her clothes, and she promised herself she would not live like that forever. When the Navy recruiting table came to her high school, she saw a glossy poster of a woman in digital camo standing at the back of a helicopter, wind whipping her hair, and the idea of being paid to be strong instead of punished for it lodged in her chest like a hook. Years later, after boot camp, after A school, after deployments to places friends in her old town could not find on a map, she enrolled in the Navy's Close Quarters Combat Program, not because she liked fighting but because she wanted a body that obeyed her, wanted to know in her bones that if someone tried to take away her space, her breath, her dignity again, she could stop them. It was during those years that she met Chief Petty Officer Rourke, a wiry SEAL with streaks of gray at his temples and a scar that split his eyebrow, who watched her run drills until her hands bled and then quietly started staying after hours, teaching her the small things, the tricks that were not in the manuals, the ways smaller fighters beat larger ones by being smarter, faster, calmer. There's always someone bigger, he told her once as she lay on the mat panting after he had flipped her 3 times in a row. But not always someone who loves doing the work more than you do, and she carried that with her through every promotion, every assignment, until the day the Navy decided they needed officers like her. Combat-tested, technically sharp, able to connect with younger recruits, to help reshape the pipeline, blending old-school toughness with a new focus on respect. And respect was exactly what Ryland Pierce had no interest in giving. He had grown up different from her, in a coastal city where his father had been a lawyer and his mother a fitness influencer, where success came with praise and participation trophies, where every setback was met with some version of "you're special, you deserve better." And by the time he reached the academy, he had built an identity on always being the best, the fastest, the most admired. He could run a mile in under 6 minutes, bench press more than most of his class, and talk to any camera that pointed his way. But under the shine there was a quiet panic that he might not be special at all, that maybe he was just another fit young man lining up to take orders from people who had already done more than he had dreamed of doing. And when he learned that part of his advanced training would be led by a woman whose record looked better on paper than his, something inside him tightened in a way he refused to name. On the first day, he had made the joke about ladies' PT hour just loud enough for his friends to hear, expecting laughter. And when a few did laugh, he felt the small rush of relief that came from still being the center of attention. On the second day, he rolled his eyes when she demonstrated a wrist lock, muttering that none of this would matter in a real fight. And when she called him forward to be her partner, her hands firm and precise as she showed the move again, he felt a thread of humiliation coil through him, because his body had obeyed her control in front of everyone. By the third day, when she called him out again for sloppy form during a drill, something snapped in him that had nothing to do with the drill itself and everything to do with old fears, old expectations, old lies he had been fed about what being a man meant. So when she told him, in front of the entire training company, "Pierce, if you can't follow basic instructions, you're a danger to everyone on your left and right. Fix it or step out," and then turned her back to demonstrate the technique again, he felt the burn that started in his cheeks and ran down his neck, and his thoughts narrowed into a single ugly line. "She embarrassed me. I'll show her she's not stronger than me. They'll see I'm not the one who backs down." That is why his fist had left his side without permission, and why the crack of his bone now echoed inside his skull as much as in his arm. In Commander Reeves's office an hour later, the air smelled of coffee and printer ink, the blinds half closed against the bright late morning sun bouncing off the water. Mara stood at attention again, shoulders square, hands behind her back, while Reeves read through statements on his tablet with slow care, his lined face giving nothing away, and across from her sat Captain Elena Ross, Base Operations Chief. watching with that quiet pilot's gaze that seemed to measure distance and risk in every situation. "Lieutenant," Reeves said at last, "walk me through your actions one more time, in your own words." She did, voice steady, explaining the drill, his previous behavior, the moment he advanced on her, the sudden punch. She described her own reaction move by move, not dressing it up, not justifying, simply laying out cause and effect, and when she finished the room went quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. "Do you believe you used excessive force?" Russ asked, leaning forward slightly. Mara thought of Ryland's arm bent at the wrong angle, of the way his face had twisted in pain, of the stunned silence of the recruits, and for a second guilt pinched at her, but she pushed past it, reaching instead for the clear memory of his eyes when he'd lunged at her. Not joking this time, not testing, but furious, his jaw clenched. "No," she said. "Given his size, his forward momentum, and the intent I saw in his face, I believe if I had tried to step back or go easy, I could have been struck. I was in front of the entire company as an instructor. If I lose control there, I lose them. And I lose the standard. I acted to stop the threat fast." Reeves tapped his stylus against the tablet, then glanced to Ross. Something passed between them, an old understanding of how close things could come to disaster in a blink. "For the record," Reeves said, "witness statement from instructors match your account. They confirmed Pierce was ordered to stand down, and that he initiated physical contact outside of training protocol. Nobody is questioning your right to defend yourself. But we both know this is going to ripple." "Yes, sir," Mara said softly. Out in the medical ward, Ryland had already called his father, who had called a friend in the Pentagon, whose assistant had called someone in the Navy chain. And by evening, a flurry of emails and inquiries would be flying, some asking reasonable questions, others looking for a convenient talking point about aggressive tactics and integration issues. Reeves sighed, his shoulders sagging briefly, then straightened. "Here's what we're going to do. A formal review, conducted here. You will remain in your role during the investigation. You will not speak about this incident to the recruits except in an official context. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "And, Lieutenant," he added, his voice softening, "whatever noise you hear in the next few days, remember this. If you had stood there and taken the hit because you were afraid of breaking his arm, I'd be writing your relief papers right now. We train warriors, not cardboard cutouts for photos." "Dismissed." She saluted, turned, and walked out, her heart surprisingly tight at his last words, because behind the stern tone she had heard something she did not often receive: trust. Over the next week the base transformed into a pressure cooker. Rumors flew faster than official memos, and every recruit seemed to walk with their shoulders hunched, trying to guess which way the wind was blowing. Some whispered that she would be fired, others said she would be quietly transferred. A few dark voices muttered that Pierce would sue and ruin her career, while a small, stubborn group of recruits who had watched her drill the entire company without ever raising her voice above fam. Calm found themselves stepping a little clearer, squaring their shoulders when they passed her in the corridor, because whatever came next, they had seen with their own eyes what it looked like when someone refused to be a punching bag for another person's anger. Ryland lay in the ward with his right arm in a brace, the steady ache of bone knitting reminding him every hour of how fast one bad decision could rewrite a future he had assumed was guaranteed. At first he raged, telling anyone who would listen that she had gone too far, that he had just been testing her reflexes, that if the roles were reversed everyone would be furious at him. But as days passed and fewer people came by to laugh at his jokes or reassure him, he began to notice a different pattern. The way his own classmates avoided his eyes, the careful distance in their voices, the awkward silence when he complained. Even his closest friend, Torres, mumbled something about "you really messed up, man," before cutting visits short. The turning point came late one evening when Chief Rourke himself appeared at the foot of his bed, hands on his hips, face like carved stone. Rourke had taught half the close-quarters curriculum the company had just begun, and he carried respect the way some men carried rank. "So," Ryland said, trying to sit up straighter, but Rourke held up a hand. "Don't sir me, Pierce. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here as the man who trained Lieutenant Keller." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Rylan had not known that. Rourke pulled a chair closer, sat down, and leaned forward. You want to be a SEAL one day, right? Yes, Chief. You think any team will trust a man who throws a sucker punch at his own instructor because his ego's bruised? Rylan's throat closed. I didn't mean, you meant it, Rourke cut in. I've watched the tapes. There's no joke in that move. That's rage. Irrational, stupid, dangerous rage. If you ever pull something like that downrange, someone on your side dies. Maybe a woman. Maybe a man. Maybe the guy who would have pulled you out of fire 5 minutes later. Silence stretched between them, filled with the soft beeping of monitors. You know what I taught Keller first? Rourke continued. How to survive men who think like you did on that field. How to read you before you step in. You proved her training worked. Congratulations. But you also proved you can't be trusted with power until you understand what to do with it. So that's it. Rylan snapped before he could stop himself. One mistake and I'm trash. Rourke's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of something else there now, not just anger. Every warrior I've ever respected has made at least one mistake big enough to ruin them. What matters is what they do after. You have a review coming up. You can walk into that room clinging to your pride and blaming everyone else. Or you can walk in and own what you did. No excuses. You want advice? Rylan nodded slowly. Start by apologizing to the person whose arm you tried to break before yours snapped. And understand this. You're not asking for her forgiveness. You're asking for permission to become different. That night, Rylan lay awake long after the ward lights dimmed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment on the field from a new angle, imagining himself not as the wrong golden boy but as a threat charging his own instructor, and for the first time the scene made him sick to his stomach. The day of the review arrived cloudy and cool, wind dragging fog over the bay. In the small conference room, a panel of 3 officers sat behind a table. Commander Reeves, Captain Ross, and a JAG representative named Commander Patel, while Mara sat on one side, uniform crisp, hands folded, and Rylan sat on the other, sling cradling his arm, face pale but jaw set. Statements were read, questions asked, and at one point Patel turned to Rylan. Officer Candidate Pierce, in your own words, why did you initiate an unauthorized strike? The script he had rehearsed with his father's lawyer, something about miscommunication and overreaction, rose to his lips, but then he remembered Rourke's eyes, the disgust in his classmate's silence, the look on Mara's face when she had looked down at him, not gloating, just tired. Something inside him broke in a different way, and the words that came out surprised even him. Because I was angry that Lieutenant Keller corrected me in front of the company, he said, voice shaking slightly. I felt humiliated. I told myself she was disrespecting me, but I was the one disrespecting her. I threw that punch because I wanted to prove she couldn't control me. It was an attack rooted in ego, not training. She defended herself the way she was supposed to. I own that. The room went quiet. Reeves studied him for a long moment. Do you believe she used excessive force? Rylan swallowed. Part of him wanted to say yes, to blame her for the pain, for the fracture, for the weeks of rehab ahead. But now, hearing it out loud, that argument sounded hollow. No, sir, he said finally. I came at her with full strength. If she'd misjudged, I could have hurt her badly. She did what we're taught to do, end the threat fast. I gave her no reason to think I would stop. Mara stared straight ahead, pulse loud in her ears, not daring to relax as the panel questioned him about his pattern of remarks, about prior warnings, about his understanding of Navy values. Step by step, his shoulders seemed to sink as he acknowledged each misstep, like a man slowly seeing the debris field of his own crash. When they finally dismissed them to deliberate, she stepped outside into the corridor, leaning against the cool wall, closing her eyes. She felt wrung out, as if the whole weight of her last decade had compressed into that one room. She had not wanted his career ruined. She had only wanted the harassment to stop, wanted the recruits to see that respect was not optional, that this new generation would not build itself on the backs of people expected to swallow abuse. When the panel called them back in, Reeves's face remained stern, but there was a note of finality in his tone. Officer Candidate Pierce, he said, this panel finds that you initiated an unauthorized and aggressive strike against a superior officer during training in direct violation of protocol and core Navy values. Effective immediately, you are removed from this training company and placed on disciplinary probation. You will undergo mandatory counseling and remedial training. Your future eligibility for advanced programs, including selection pipelines, will depend on your conduct from this point forward. Do you understand? Ryland's mouth went dry. His dreams of a straight path to the teams cracked like his bone had, but he also felt something like gratitude creep in. This was not expulsion, not the end. It was a hard reroute. Yes, sir. As for Lieutenant Keller, Reeves continued, turning to her, this panel finds that your use of force was justified in self-defense and in defense of training integrity. However, this incident exposes broader issues in company culture. We are assigning you a new task. In addition to your current duties, you will lead a series of sessions on respect, boundaries, and close quarters control for the entire company. Chief Rourke will assist. We expect you to use this event as a teaching moment. Do you accept? Mara swallowed, surprised. Yes, sir, she said quietly. Good, Captain Russ added. Because if we are going to build warriors who know the difference between strength and abuse, they need to learn it from someone who does. Afterward, as they left the room, Ryland lingered in the hallway, heart pounding. He watched Mara step toward the exit, her eyes tired, posture still upright, and before fear could stop him he called out, Lieutenant Keller. She turned, gaze steady, and for the first time since the injury he met her eyes without trying to win anything. I'm sorry, he said, the words scraping out. Not just for the punch. For the comments. For everything. You didn't deserve that. She studied him in silence long enough that he wanted to look away. You were reckless and disrespectful, she said at last. But you aren't the first, and you won't be the last. What matters is what you do now. Make sure nobody who looks up to you ever thinks what you did is okay. He nodded, throat too tight to speak. And as she walked away, he understood that forgiveness, if it ever came, would not be cheap or fast. It would have to be earned, daily, by becoming a different man than the one who had swung at her that morning. The weeks that followed changed the base more than any memo ever could. In the first training session after the review, Mara stood before the full company. 280 recruits lined up in neat rows on the same field where the bone had snapped, and spoke not as a victim or a hero, but as an officer who had nothing left to hide. She told them, in simple, calm words, about power, about fear, about the difference between strength used to protect and strength used to dominate, about the men she had served with who never once needed to belittle anyone to prove their worth, about the civilians she had helped evacuate under fire who trusted her not because of her gender, but because she had shown up when it mattered. Then she and Chief Rourke demonstrated again the wrist lock that had broken Ryland's arm, this time slowly, carefully, emphasizing control, teaching the recruits how to feel the line between a firm restraint and a catastrophic injury. They ran drill after drill on de-escalation, on distance, on reading intent, on stopping a threat with the lowest possible force, and she noticed that even the cockiest recruits watched her more closely now. Not with fear, but with a kind of focus that meant they understood failure had consequences for everyone, not just themselves. One afternoon, weeks later, the company gathered for a mixed unit demonstration attended by visiting officers, community leaders, and families. The stands were full, the sun high, and a sense of showmanship buzzed through the air. As part of the demonstration, Mara's company would perform a series of controlled close-quarters drills to show how discipline and training replaced brute strength. Backstage at the edge of the field, she checked gear, adjusted gloves, ran through the sequence in her head, and then heard a familiar voice. Ryland said, standing a few feet away, out of uniform, wearing a simple polo and a rehab brace on his arm. He had been allowed to attend as an observer, not a participant. I just wanted to say, I've been sitting in on the classes from the back. I've learned more from the way you've handled this than I expected. I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I just want you to know I'm trying. She looked at him, noticing how his posture had changed, not the cocky lean of before, but a quieter, more grounded stance, as if the weight of his own choices had finally settled onto his shoulders and he had decided to carry it instead of pretending it wasn't there. "Trying is a start," she said. "Keep going." When she stepped onto the field a few minutes later, the roar of the crowd washed over her, but her focus narrowed to her recruits, lined up, ready. They moved through the routines like a single organism. Throws, holds, controlled takedowns, each motion precise, respectful of limits, powerful without cruelty. And when the final sequence ended, with one of the smallest recruits flipping a heavier partner cleanly onto the mat and holding him without harm, the crowd erupted, not because of a broken bone or dramatic humiliation, but because they had seen what real discipline looked like. In the stands, a little girl in a navy t-shirt tugged on her father's sleeve and pointed at Mara. "Daddy, she's small like me," the child said. "Could I be like her?" Her father, a sailor with a thick beard and tired eyes, watched Mara stand at attention as the commander praised the demonstration, and he nodded. "If you work as hard as she did, maybe even stronger," he replied. Mara did not hear the exchange, but she felt the ripple effect of days like this in the quiet moments. When a young recruit approached her after class to ask about dealing with fear, when a male instructor started calling out sexist jokes before she had to, when Chief Rourke, in his dry way, told her she'd made more cultural change in 3 weeks than some policies had in 10 years. Nights were still hard sometimes. She still woke with memories of old alleyways and raised voices and the sight of Ryland's fist coming at her, and she still questioned whether there could have been a version of that day when nobody walked away injured. But each morning she pulled on her boots and stepped back onto the field because the work of building something better was never done in comfort. Years later, when that company graduated and scattered to ships and bases and units around the world, stories about that morning on the training field still surface now and then, usually twisted a bit. Some said she had shattered his arm in 3 places with a single flick. Others said he had tried to choke her and she had knocked him out. Others turned it into a legend about a tiny officer facing down a giant bully. But the ones who had been there remembered the details differently. They remembered the way time had slowed, the way her body had moved with calm precision, the way the crack in the air had been followed not by gloating but by order, by medics, by leadership stepping in, by a system trying, however imperfectly, to get this one right. Ryland, after months of probation and rehab and hard conversations, was eventually allowed back into a different training track. Not the one he had dreamed of, but one where he served as a logistics officer on a destroyer, learning the unglamorous skill of keeping everything running so others could do their jobs. He never forgot the feeling of his bone breaking, or the look on Mara's face when she had chosen to defend herself without hatred. And over time he became the officer who stepped in. When he heard the same kind of jokes he used to make, shutting them down with a quiet authority that came from knowing too well where that road led. As for Mara, she stayed at Edgewater longer than she had planned, turning down a transfer to a cushy staff job because she had seen with her own eyes what kind of leaders this place could produce when it got things right. She watched classes come and go, some full of swagger, some quiet and thoughtful, and each time she stepped onto the field, feeling the packed earth under her boots and the eyes of hundreds of recruits on her, she remembered the promise she had made to herself as a scared teenager, never again to live as a person waiting to be hit, always to stand where she chose, and to use whatever strength she had not to dominate but to protect. On the anniversary of that training incident, the base held a low-key seminar on ethics and power in combat units. It was not flashy, not recorded for any public channel, just a room full of young officers and NCOs listening as several speakers shared hard-won lessons. When Mara finished her talk and stepped down from the podium, a young woman in the front row, fresh from the academy, stopped her. She said, voice nervous, "I heard a story about you before I came here. I heard you broke a guy's arm in front of the whole company. People tell it like some kind of legend. I just want to know, what did it feel like?" Mara paused, considering, surprised by how long it had been since she had thought of that cracking sound as anything but a teaching moment. "Honestly," she replied, "it felt like a line being drawn, not between men and women, between people who think strength is about control and people who know strength is about responsibility. I wish it hadn't taken a break to draw it. But once it was there, we had a choice, to pretend it didn't matter or to build something better on this side of it. The young officer nodded slowly, eyes bright with understanding. Later that evening, as the sun sank over the bay and painted the water gold, Mara walked alone along the pier, listening to the distant clatter of equipment, the shouts of late-night PT, the hum of engines. This place, with its noise and its struggles and its imperfect people, had become home, not because it was flawless, but because it was where she had taken all the fear and smallness of her past and forged them into something steadier. Out on the training field, fresh boot prints marked the dirt where a new class had just finished drills. Each printer promised that someone else would stand where she had, make choices that rippled outward, hurt or heal, tear down or build up. She knew she could not control all of that, but she could keep showing up, keep teaching, keep drawing the line. And somewhere, in 100 different units, the recruits who had watched her that day would carry the memory too, not as a tale of a woman humiliating a man, but as the moment they first understood that true strength never swings first in anger, and that when you try to strike someone who lives by that code, you might just end up breaking your own arm on the edge of it.